Okay, we are back again. It's just sweet. Okay, so today I wanted, trying to be very careful here, not to go back a page. It's very easy. So today I wanted to discuss conscious agent theory again. It's the third stream that I've basically done talking about this at this point. I mean, I think it's only the second, but the first one we got the internet cut off, and so it turned into what looks like two streams, but it was really one. So I want to show some more clips. I finally got through the interview of Donald Hoffman by Kurtjai Mungel. It was a great interview. I've never seen a theory so close to sentient singularity theory. There isn't one. Prior to this, the closest one was probably, I don't know. There was a lot that were pretty close, but in methodology, constructor theory, but in actual descriptive structure, probably a number of them, probably geometric unity and a few others. But so, but conscious agent theory by Donald Hoffman proposes that consciousness is fundamental to the material world, and that you start from consciousness, you presume consciousness, and build from there. And basically, the goal is to show how the interface structures, I don't know if that's his term or mine. I mean, it's kind of probably both, but he says basically the interface, but the structures of our interface, like space-time, like the primary colors, like our senses, things like that, like our senses of taste, or our various types of sense of taste, various type of, you know, I guess, just actions that we can take, the structures of our limbs, all of these things are a built interface that comes from consciousness. This is exactly what sentient singularity theory proposes as well. And there is a fundamental difference between conscious agent theory, and I want to discuss it a bit because it's very key. And I'm not even claiming to know who's right, but I just know where we differ. And it's severe, but it's also like, it's like all these theories are so close, but then the minute differences in their focus, or where they stop, that's really what it is. It's where they stop. Where do they draw the line and say, this is what is most fundamental? At that line, if that line is different for one versus the other, it's a different theory. And conscious agent theory proposes that, I think that self-awareness is not fundamental, but consciousness is. And sentient singularity does not hold to that. Sentient singularity believes that self-awareness is fundamental. And in conscious agent theory, there are conscious agents that are conscious of particular inputs that then can form structures with networks with other conscious agents that give rise to self-awareness, if I'm correct. And I think that I am. We'll look at it. That is not true of sentient singularity theory. Sentient singularity theory is that self-awareness is fundamental, and when you start deconstructing that structure, then you can get to the four primary perspectives, and then you get to what are called quantum of consciousness, which is essentially what conscious agent theory proposes is a conscious agent. And but I don't. This is actually very difficult, and we'll look at my my abstract of my paper, because I was actually discussing this with somebody in our Discord discussion last week about. I've been working on perfecting that, because that's the one part of the paper that has to be perfect. If I'm a perfectionist on everything, I'll never get it out, but that has to be basically perfect. And the last paragraph is not quite there. But the issue is about this. It is about, like, the line between a conscious agent and a self-aware and a self-aware being. Okay? And or the line between a conscious agent and a sentient singularity. And so this is very difficult, because in some ways they are the same, but from two different perspectives. And in other ways, they are described as not quite the same, because a conscious agent, according to Donald Hoffman, is a consciousness that is not necessarily self-aware, and I don't believe that that is possible fundamentally, because if everything is a conscious agent, the initial singular conscious agent, the prime conscious agent of existence itself, must have been aware of something, and if it was all there was, then it has to by default be aware of itself. And so therefore sentient singularity that is self-aware is fundamental to existence, and not a conscious agent that is not yet self-aware. So this is what I mean by you have to figure out where these theories stop, where they draw the line at their definitions. And just like a constructor in constructor theory draws the line and says a constructor is not a consciousness. It is a mechanism that can be used by a consciousness called a user. That means that it is not as fundamental, if consciousness is fundamental, to conscious agent theory. Conscious agent theory draws the line at a conscious unit, or a conscious agent that is not necessarily self-aware, but is aware of something, and then can form a network, essentially, with other conscious agents to lead to self-awareness, but isn't intrinsically self-aware. And then sentient singularity theory states that a self-aware feeling, aka a sentient being, a singular sentient being, aka sentient singularity, is the initial structure of existence itself, and it is forming sentient singularities within itself, essentially. So it's just a singular sentient singularity forming singularities of sentience within itself, infinitely, but according to a finite pattern. So the pattern is finite, but the growth of the quantity of sentient singularities within the prime sentient singularity, God, is infinite in quantity. If that makes sense. So I wanted to take a look at some things. I also wanted to show some of the models that we were working on last week, because it's pretty impressive where we got. Because first we started with this. This wasn't really last week that not this. This is all. These are the four primary perspectives. Then we transferred this over to basically be used according to my decision tree, essentially, but we made it into a network. And The four primary processes are prioritization, differentiation, interpretation, and observation. And or perception. And this has basically been something I've been working on for a while. So what is the structure of mind? What leads to what? It's basic. You can kind of see this is like a hop vibration, like torus structure, basically just rotating, spinning inside out and outside in at the same time. And then from there, we went to this. We looked at the primary sequence, observation, differentiation, prioritization, interpretation. And then we went to this. And then finally, we got to this, which is just I worked on this all night. This was so hard getting to figure out these arrows. And I'm not even saying they're perfectly correct, but they are getting there. That's all I will say. And it took so much work. It was insane. I mean, sometimes with this stuff, that's just the way that it goes, though. You sit there and you just think about, like, is there one extra arrow here where there's like three? Should all the arrows in between them be like this, or should they be like this, or should there be only one here? How many arrows here are there? Like, what are the colors? The colors are very specific, and they show, paths of information, essentially. But you can see here, I use the perspectives. I use the primary perspectives. And then these are the intrinsic perspectives. So internal, inside, oneness, outside, singularity. And then these are external, inside, outside, separateness. And then it basically shows just a lot of just alignments. So let's actually do this. File, open, recent. So here, this is actually a little bit better because it has the and the or input into the model. So these are actually a little bit more done. So you could say outside of separateness and inside of separateness is oneness, and inside of oneness or outside of oneness is separateness. So something inside of oneness or something outside of oneness. So basically, if a fetus inside of a womb is inside of oneness, but also separateness, and then you also have you versus someone, your friend, which is outside of oneness, and which is outside and separateness. So inside of oneness is inside and separateness, and so outside of oneness is outside and separateness. So basically, and then it's inside of oneness or outside of oneness is separateness. So basically, it's just basically describing and self-referencing all these structures. But here you can see with the primary processes, you have perception at the center, and then you have the intrinsic processes here, which is prioritization, interpretation, and differentiation. So you go perception, differentiation, prioritization, interpretation. Interpretation back to perception, etc. And the external processes are perception, again. You can perceive something inside of you in a thought, or you have like a revelation or something like that, or an epiphany, or I don't know. You just a realization. Then you have consideration, which means like you are. It's just a thought. That's what that means. So consideration here means a thought. So you if you have a thought that comes into your head, consideration. So perception, thought, proclamation, and action. Proclamation is communication. Proclamation and action are communication. So and then consideration or thought and an action are creation. So creation can either be a thought or it can be an action, and communication can be proclamation, or it can be an action. And they all go back to perception. So you could say you perceive something, causes you to have a thought, which causes you to say something, which causes an action to happen, which you then perceive the results of, which then you take that perception and you differentiate it, the various aspects to it. You prioritize those various aspects. You interpret, what those various aspects of what you see, goes back to perception, and then it goes again. Consideration, proclamation, action, perception. So it's basically doing this infinity H structure type thing. And this is all about things outside of you. And this is all about things happening like inside your mind. And this is like outside your mind, kind of, but not really. Because there is no outside the mind, but there's what you perceive as outside of you, and then there's what you perceive as inside of you. So this is the model of the processes of being. You have the or here and the and here. So cognition and decision. So if you think, you have to act kind of in order to be, really. And in some ways, it's kind of, even in certain instances, if you have information processing that goes on, cognition, and then you make a decision not to act, even, that's still being. So there has to be some type of decision made. If you're just making an observation and you have no decision regarding it, then you're not really being. You aren't there. You have to. Part of being is agency, and part of aka conscious agent theory, and part of having agency is being able to make a decision. That doesn't mean that you get to do what you want. It just means you get to have an opinion, basically. And then you have creation or communication, and you could choose either or. And they're also kind of can be one, really, but you can also stop at communication and not go to creation. So you can stop at speech and not go to action, but you can't stop at thought if it's external. But here you do cognition and decision, because you must have a thought and a thought about the thought that you have. You have to think, and you have to have a thought about your thinking. You can't just observe that the sky is blue and that's it, and still be. And this is where conscious agent theory and sentient singularity theory diverge. Because according to my model, and just what I see logically inevitably, this is part of being. Okay? And that's not true in conscious agent theory. It doesn't appear to be, at least. And if I'm misinterpreting things, we'll find out eventually. I would love to have Donald Hoffman on this channel. I will be reaching out to have him on. I'm going to Hawaii next week, so I will be gone all of next week, by the way. I'll repeat that tomorrow. But and our Discord discussion will be shorter this week, but we should still have it. But I'm leaving on Friday, so. But I'll be back next Tuesday for normal. It's got normal streams, but not next Tuesday, but the next Tuesday. But yeah, this is a little different than where's conscious agent theory? Here. Okay, here. Okay, I have not read this paper all the way through. I've read the abstract, most of it, but we'll go through it again. This is Donald Hoffman's The Origin of Conscious Agents. Studies of the evolution of perception using evolutionary games and genetic algorithms reveal that natural selection routinely drives veridical perceptions, aka perceptions that resemble the truth, to quick extinction when they compete against perceptions that are not veridical and tuned to fitness. This is something I think about all the time, but not like I just think about it all the time. This motivates an interface theory of perception, which proposes that our perceptions are not windows on truth, but are more like the Windows interface on a PC. I say this all the time. I say constantly that basically space time is like the desktop. You are a conscious file on that desktop, though, because sentient singularity theory combines with the. It's basically that you're inside of a quantum computer, uh, essentially running on the previous aeon. So or verse as it's called in sentient singularity theory, but it's basically that's what it is. But I get what he's saying here. He's basically saying that it's like the heads up display of a aircraft. If you're paying attention to the instrumentation, you could use that to fly. You don't have to like look out the window and see that reality, quote unquote. But and I agree with him on this. He's right. We are seeing an interface basically that keeps us. It basically allows us to operate in the change space, as I call it. It says the desktop of a PC allow us to use the computer without being distracted by irrelevant details about its internal structure and operation. Similarly, our perceptions allow us to act adaptively in the world while being ignorant of its true structure. Space-time is our species-specific desktop, and physical objects are icons on that desktop. And space-time and physical objects are not insights into objective reality, but species-specific adaptations that allow us to survive and reproduce. This requires a radical reformulation of our notion of the nature of objective reality and the notion of time. Agreed. In light of the evolutionary results, I propose that consciousness rather than space-time and physical objects is fundamental. I propose a formal model of consciousness based on mathematical structure called conscious agents. I then propose how time and space emerge from the interactions of conscious agents. I can show how time and space emerge from the interactions of conscious agents. I have models of it. Basically, this is one of them. But we'll get into that. But keywords: consciousness, time, perception. Okay. Like, I don't think I haven't read the rest of the paper, basically any of it, but I did look at like a couple models of his, like this one. What's fascinating is this is a star tetrahedron. Don't believe me? Watch this. Okay. Here we go. Boom. 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 People think religion is a bunch of nonsense. And I hate that word religion, but uh, I think that it was a word invented by atheists to label as a label for something that they didn't understand, or anti-theists essentially. I don't really believe in the term religion or atheism. I don't think that it's possible. You can be agnostic about a lot of things. God is not one of them. You can either believe that existence is a sentient, feeling, self-aware being, or you can believe that it isn't. And you interact with that every single day, so you can't really claim to be agnostic about it. There you go. So basically, in his model, you perceive and you experience and you make a decision. I guess decision is actually part of his model. An action then happens, and then you act, and then it influences the world, which causes a perception via an experience, causes you to decide. And then, there's an action and you have to act. So basically, this is internal and external. So experience, action, and world. Your action impacts the world. The world impacts your experience. Your experience is, the foundation of your action. And then you have here your perception. You perceive, then you decide, then you act. You perceive, decide, act, perceive, decide, act. And then in between that, your perception, decision, and action influences the world, which influences your experience, which influences what your action, the limits of your actions. So it's very similar to mine. And I mean, it's funny because it basically just the way he has this arranged, this n count. I don't know what this. I don't understand like that n, aka count. I guess he's just like using that. He's counting basically what's going on here in this structure. I don't know. I have to look more into it, but that looks like it's probably perception in my model essentially, because it's everything is orienting around it, but it's also not, because it's this is the external, which is basically the purple here, and this is the internal, which is the red, and it's almost the same. It's literally almost the same. Perception, differentiation, prioritization, interpretation. I guess that's okay. I see what he did. What I did versus him. I broke this out because this is basically how the binary triality structure gets built, which I think is the Calabi-Yau manifold. And you have differentiation, which is basically duality. So like this is this and not that. And that is that and not this. And then you have prioritization. So this first, then this, then this. It's generationality is triality. So binary, triality. And so basically, if you wanted to look at this, and this would be fascinating actually. And you wanted to assign number values to this, basically you would do this. So you have 1, And then you have differentiation is 2. Prioritization is 3. Then this would be 4. And then here, this would be consideration, which is a thought, which is based on a perception. So this would be 2. Sorry, 2. And then proclamation would be like 3. This would be 4. But it could also be such that it's like 5, 6. 7. It's the sum. 28, 27. Interesting. $19, $10. Dang, that it makes so much sense. It's insane. 19 is the interior sum of the quantum of consciousness model, which is, I think, what a conscious agent is. But it's like the interaction between two conscious agents is like that. That's 10 and 10, so this would be 20, and this would be 28. Interesting. Okay, it works. So it's very similar. A conscious agent comprises the remaining 6. The world is represented by measurable space W, world. A conscious agent comprises the remaining 6 components of the diagram. The maps P, D, and A can be thought of as communication channels. So P, D, A, like public displays of affection. Trying to think of a way to remember this a bit. Can be thought of as communication channels. X is the measurable space of conscious experience of the agent. And G is the measurable space of its possible actions. An integer n counts the successive experiences of the agent. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, I get it. A conscious agent, C, is a 6-tuple. Fascinating. I totally agree. You know what's funny is that this is my quantum of consciousness model, which I said was his conscious agent, I'm pretty sure. And watch this. This is 6 perspectives because you have oneness without, outside, separate, oneness within, inside, singularity. That is a total of 6. And then it's also reflexive or reflective on the other side, but it's still a total of 6. So you start in sentient singularity theory, though, you start with 4 primary perspectives. Basically, you have your initial existent condition, which is a sentient singularity, which is infinite oneness, basically. And then you have though that a sentient singularity is comprised of 4 primary perspectives, which is oneness, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And they have their definitions here below them. And then that goes on to basically be, once it interacts with another conscious agent, basically, or sentient singularity, it becomes what's called a quantum of consciousness, which is a moment. It's like a self-aware moment. And it's a sextuple. There's also this. So if you go to my website here and you go to models, there's so many. I added more today, but this is the binary triality that I didn't add today. This is pretty old, but the binary triality that I found, it's pretty much everywhere. There's just a bunch of examples. Mathematical order of operations, the fundamental perspectives, which are the sextuple perspectives inside of quantum of consciousness, fundamental moods, fermion, the quarks basically in the fermions, the leptons, which are also fermions, bosons, forces, senses, sense organs, the decimals in a division of any number by 7 that isn't a number divisible by 7. So if you do 1 divided by 7, you'll get this number. It's like 0.4 5718, something like that. Just repeats and repeats. Language, fundamental questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. That's also a sextuple. So the food groups, everything like this, it has to do with how your mind breaks down information, because it's organizing it into a hierarchy, which is a triality, and it's also differentiating it via a binary. So, and it could also be the opposite. It could be differentiation is trialic and prioritization or hierarchy is duality. It's like, boss and subordinate and what would it be? Like manager, but it's not manager. It's gosh. What's the opposite of subordinate? Someone in the chat. Hopefully somebody remembers it, but you get what I'm saying, basically. Okay, questions in the chat. Yo, is the recognition of God the recognition of reality, that reality is a conscious sentient? Yes. Yes. Construct awareness in my model shows almost not even almost mathematically, like numerically, I'll say, but based mathematically, that construct awareness is awareness that you are of self, which is that you are, thinking, feeling, self-aware being, and that you are inside. Construct awareness would be awareness of the construct that you are within, or that gave rise to your self-awareness. And that what that means is not just that you look around and you see space. It means you are aware that you are inside of another sentient being, just like you, and also that therefore you are composed of sentient beings, just like you. That's construct awareness. And but it's fascinating that Irwin also, I'm pretty sure once I read a little bit of a paper that he put out, and it was also, he identified this sextuple system or structure, and it definitely appears that Hoffman has found it as well. It's funny because if you look at my model of perception and basically, or the primary processes of being. You have basically it's this. It's 3 here. 1, 2, 3. Ignore the center, and then 1, 2, 3. Ignore the center. So it's 3 and 3, and then at the center is perception. So I have perception a little bit different, like placed differently than he does. But basically the sextuple still boils down to 4, basically, because it's these 2 are decision, this 2 are cognition, these 2 are creation, and these 2 are communication. And even then you could say this is internalization, and this is externalization, and then at the center is the perceiver of it all, and that is then therefore like the oneness, a sentient singularity, perceiving everything and maneuvering via action, thought. Basically, this is thought, speech, action. You think something, you say something, you do something. Those are the 3 potentialities of your potential possibilities. So it says here, G is the measurable space of possible actions. That measurable space of possible actions would be this. Because in a way, speech is action. And thought is even an action. So to consider something, to give something actual thought, to truly think about something, is an action almost. It's not an externalized action, but it is an action because it's not something that you do unconsciously. It is something you do consciously, and you have to do it consciously. And if you don't do it consciously, then you're not actually doing it. It takes effort to actually think about something. And that's why I use the word consideration. Because when somebody says something like, consider this, it's not just like a thought that just pops into your head about like, I'm cold. It's like an action. Consider the following. Consider if this was the case, then what would this be like? It's an active thought. It's not a passive thought. That's the best way to put it, is that your perception here in the center is basically passive thought. It's what we would call thoughts, but it's not really thoughts. It's just perceptions, and it's just passive, and it's just happening no matter what. But you have to choose to use that perception to consider something new about it. Okay, that's why it's under creation. So if you look here, you see creation encompasses consideration and action. It is because to consider something honestly is to think about it in a new way. It is a creative process. It's a creative action, but it's just a mental action alone. But it's an action. It has to be chosen. It's active. And this is, a proclamation. To communicate is it's the exact same thing, but is because it has to be active. It's not passive. And the difference is that a consideration is an internal dialogue. It's basically like an internal conversation with yourself. Okay? And then proclamation is a consideration is an active communication with yourself. Proclamation is an active communication with another. And action is is uh, is to actually change something, um, such that everyone uh, would perceive it. So it's not just in your head, like you've made a change in your mind. It's like, no, action um, would be like a change is made to the system. So even if a change is made in your mind, others would perceive that change in you. So if become, I don't know, go sober, or you find God, or both, or you, I don't know, whatever it is, go to the dark side. Like that's a change that other people would perceive. I watched every single Star Wars movie with my wife over the last 3 weeks, by the way, in order. I've never done that before in my life, but some of you know we had some unfortunate news. Like a few weeks ago, my wife and I had a miscarriage, and it led to us basically going on a movie binge. And so we started that, and so we finished it last night. We finished the very last Star Wars. 11 movies. We did all of Harry Potter. That's like her favorite series in the world. And then we did Star Wars, which is mine. Even though I recognize Harry Potter, definitely better movies. But I'm going to do a stream on them because there's only one. I say this all the time. There's only one pattern. And Jordan Peterson talks about like archetypes. I'm going to do a stream on this because I was watching both of these series and I was like, they are both just, they're basically just, they are about the chosen one bringing balance to this, to, you know, the force essentially, and basically having to die and come back. And that's true in Harry Potter, and then it's also true in Star Wars, especially at the very end of the last one. It's fascinating to watch. I mean, there's really only one story. There's really only one story, and it's the story of Scripture, like it is. I mean, whether you believe that Scripture is real or not, you can believe that it's just as fake as Harry Potter or Star Wars, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. But you can't reasonably deny when you start digging into it and looking at and considering them honestly and actively, that there's really only one pattern. It's fascinating what that pattern is, and if there's only one pattern, it's the pattern of reality. Those archetypal stories are the stories of us. Like that is what will happen with us. Not saying that exactly that's what happens. There's all kinds of differences, but there's anything that is a consistent theme that will be true also in the real world, not just in fiction. But it was fascinating to watch. I will do a stream on it. I started writing down some of the my thoughts on it, but there's so much that it's gonna have to take a lot of like prep work. Wouldn't consideration be part of the internal landscape or part of cognition? No, because it's active. Like it's creative. It's about something new. It's about new information, not processing information that's already there. It's complicated because you are trying to look at something in a new way, which means you're looking at something outside of you already, if that makes sense. So if you're trying to look, a consideration is like, it's not just a thought. That's why I didn't use the word thought, but it basically is thought. But true thought is actually an active process. And in my model, which the very first model I ever made when I was working on just the philosophy of artificial intelligence, was this one, this decision tree. And basically what it shows is that the first step in thinking is to reject your current default status. So if you assume the sky is blue and you want to think about whether or not it's blue and consider it actively, you have to reject the idea that the sky is blue. So you have to say, okay, actually, the sky is a different color that is not blue. So you can't say the sky is not blue. You'd have to be like, the sky is red, because it has to be an active statement, not a positive statement, not a negative statement. So basically, you would say, instead of the sky is blue, you would say the sky is red, and then you would look for evidence that the sky is red. Or if you don't believe in God, or if you don't see God, you have to, if you're going to actively consider whether or not God is real, you have to reject your default status, which would be basically atheism or anti-theism, and then assume that God is real, and then look for evidence that that new status is correct. So you have to define what that new status really means, though. You can't just say God is real. Okay, I'm looking for evidence. You have to assume God is real, define what that means, and then look for evidence. Very specifically define what that means. And if you're going to be like, God is, I don't see God, but I'm going to consider God as real, I'm going to assume for the sake of argument, or consider for the sake of argument, that God is real, and that God is a man that sits on a cloud and throws lightning bolts. And then you assume that's true, and then you look around for it, and if you don't see it, then you can now it basically supports the idea that God is not real. But if you change the definition from, a guy who sits on a cloud throwing lightning bolts, and you're like, I don't see God, but I'm going to consider the idea that God is real, and God is now defined as that existence itself is a singular self-aware being, and now I have to look for evidence of that. And then basically you test new status against evidence and observations, and test evidence and observations against historical data or statistical data. And basically, it's an active action. It is to look at something outside of you. Even if you're not, it's to observe something outside of you, of what you currently think of as you. That's why it's not, it's under creation, which makes it extrinsic. Because the thoughts that you're thinking about as being intrinsic or internal is interpretation. So basically, taking information that you already have organized into a hierarchy, and you've differentiated it in your mind, and there's no new information really, there's no new consideration looking at something outside of you. You have data in your head, essentially, and you're just interpreting it. You're thinking about it. That is this. So this is internal. It's not to look at what is outside of you. It's to look at what you already know and just think about it. And this is to think about things that you don't already know. And to figure out the things you don't already know, this is to organize the things you know, basically. So this organize the things you know and discover the things you don't. And if it's discover the things that you don't, then it's extrinsic. It's even if it's not happening in the material world, because the material world is fake anyways. Hey guys, hey Keel? I don't know how to pronounce your name. Kyle? I don't know. You can spell it, but Kael. Hey. So I hope that makes some sense. I want to look at some clips on all of this though. But it's, I mean, I'm very impressed by Hoffman's work. Like, it's fascinating. Look, here now he's doing quadratic structures. 1, 2, 3, 4. Two conscious agents, C1 and C2. Each agent is part of the world W for the other agent. For the lower part of the diagram exists C1. Upper part is C2. Three agents joined into a network. This is literally this. Outside objective outside observer, subjective inside observer. But this is showing how it manifests space-time, but yeah. It's the interaction between two beings. The green is one, the yellow is another. Observer, aka conscious agent. But it's not really, it's sentient singularities. He did some amazing work, Hoffman. I really think see, I don't like the way that he right. I'll explain, but I don't like that he calls them conscious agents if it's not self-aware intrinsically, because it's not an agent. Whereas in sentient singularity, a quantum of consciousness is an instance. It's a self-aware instance, essentially, or self-referential instance, but it's not. It's like a conscious instance, but it's not an agent. Whereas like an agent would be a sentient singularity in my model, but an agent has to have agency, which means it has to have decision-making abilities, and which means it has to have self-awareness. I don't think that I think that what's throwing him off is that he isn't sure if self-awareness is a necessity of a conscious agent, and I think that it is if the conscious agent is a sentient singularity. But let's look at some clips, because maybe we'll get from his own words. Okay, this is one I kind of want to look at.
I love this. You can composed of different conscious agents, and then we can have a string of them. Right. Why are you calling?
I literally call them a string as well. It's in my. That's fascinating.
That objective to me, and this just might be semantics. I hear that as subjective, given that it's a conscious agent. That is, it's a subject all the way through the chain. Right. If it was just, if you were like, hey, there's one world, or there's a few, but W is not dependent on other conscious agents, then I could see using the term objective. Why is it that you still use the term objective when we can extend the graph to just conscious agents?
Right. So the proposal is that what the universe is fundamentally is a vast network of interaction.
Basically, just to get past this quickly, I think Kurt's question was great, which is why I showed it. But he's basically saying, why are you using the term objective reality, basically, when it's a subjective reality, because you're talking about conscious agents, but so why aren't you using the term subjective? But basically, it's that space-time and the observations within space-time are subjective, and then the objective structures that are having those subjective experiences are conscious agents. So that's what he's getting at, basically, is that the structure that gives rise, the patterns of the theory of everything or the theory of Every0ne, that is objective. Those are objective structures, and they that is the structure of mind, the structures of mind, but which is really part of one superstructure essentially. But it is, space-time is a subjective experience, and that the patterns that give rise to that subjective experience within space-time is objective. So basically that's what he's saying. But it's a good question. I just wanted to get kind of like explain that quickly. But this is the difference right here, though. This is what I wanted to get at most of all today, because this is the difference between sentient singularity theory and conscious agent theory, from what I can see.
Conglomeration of conscious agents?
It's a data structure that they build. That is not fundamental.
Objectivity?
The structures that have experiences make
objectivity?
An experience that a network.
Okay, I might stop you every once in a while to clarify just for myself. You're saying that a self is a conglomeration of conscious agents?
It's a data structure that they build.
Does that mean that right now I'm talking to Donald? You're not one conscious agent. I'm speaking to quite a few.
Probably a countless collection of conscious.
Uncountable.
Well, I don't know if it's uncountable, but I certainly couldn't count them. But as you know, uncountable is a technical term in mathematics. So I just want to make sure people who know that. I'm not saying that it's uncountable in that sense. It may be, but I'm not claiming that. But it's certainly not countable by me. So the idea is that, for example, we know that there are at least two different subjects in me. We can see that if I take a knife and cut the corpus callosum, which I have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. You do too. There's a band of fibers called the corpus.
Hopefully I do.
Yeah. And there's
Sometimes I wonder.
There, 225 million fibers. And if you cut those fibers, it turns out you can actually get clear evidence in a few people that this has been done with, that there's a different personality in the left hemisphere than the right hemisphere. In one case, the left hemisphere believed in God, the right hemisphere was an atheist. The left hemisphere wanted to have a desk job, the right hemisphere wanted to be a race car driver. And they can even fight. The left hemisphere controls the right hand, the right hemisphere controls the left hand, and they can fight. The left hand can be fighting what the right hand is doing. Trying to cook, the left hand might destroy an omelet that you're making. You try to put on some clothes, the left hand might be taking off the clothes the right hand is trying to put on. So these two different consciousnesses, and I'm saying that tip of an iceberg, there's this whole lattice of conscious agents that together cooperate to create the conscious agent that's me, but the self that I have, the sense of myself with my personal history and so forth, is a data structure that I create.
Okay, I feel like I'm slipping up because I don't know, and this is another one, by the way. Causality is elusive. Identity is also one of those where the closer you look, the more liquid it gets. Are you using self and identity synonymously?
Well, no. So I'm thinking about self in the colloquial sense that we most think about. I am so and so. Here's my name. This is my personal history. This is what's important to me. This is my goals. And so that kind of self that we experience ourselves, the thing that we're afraid of losing in death and so forth. Right. That is a data structure. Now, again,
that's interesting. You're saying that the self is also a data structure.
Yes, that's right. The
Okay,
self,
okay. Sorry, continue. Yeah.
at least in this theory that I'm working on, and I can explain why we're going that direction if you want. But the notion of a self, right? So there's certain views of the self that it's there's no such thing as a persisting self, but this is called the pearl view. It's like the number of pearls on a string. So there's a pearl, a different instantiation of the self at each moment along this string. So there are certain Eastern mystical traditions, but also certain Western philosophers who take this point of view that you don't have one persisting self, but you have a sequence of selves. And
It's both, okay? Because what it is it's a blockchain. The self is a blockchain, and it is a chain like the pearls, but it's that imagine if each pearl was a different puzzle piece that linked up with the previous pearl that was a puzzle piece, and that it only fit with the previous puzzle piece, so that because each previous instantiation of your identity is unique each time, because it builds on the previous bit of information and always adds new information, and because of that it's always slightly different, but it's also intrinsically linked to the previous, and because of that it's a blockchain. It's just like a blockchain. It is not even just like a blockchain. A blockchain is the objective structure of reality. I've talked about this before. It's why AI needs a blockchain. It's DNA is a blockchain. Numbers itself is a blockchain. It's a double helix blockchain. If you don't believe me, all you need to do is look at spin structures. And I've showed that before on here, but I can show it real quick right now. If you look at spin sequences, like this, like is one that I made, but the Fibonacci sequence is one. This is building off of other spin structures. But if I move this and you look, and just don't look at the numbers, but look what the shapes the numbers are making. It's this like twisted, braided rope thing. It's that each string is in relation to another string and intersects with another string. And because of this, it's basically forming this like double helix. That it's a spinning structure, so it's a helical structure, and it's information is spinning out and information is spinning in at the same time. So as you observe the universe and the universe observes you, it is creating a double helix, information from the outside in and information from the inside out, intersecting into a twisting, spinning structure, information chain. So it's both that it is like the pearl idea, basically, but it's more complicated than that because each pearl is unique and fits only with the previous one because it's a blockchain. And this structure exists in the mathematical objective kind of abstract space, which is, you can see it here though when we observe it, and you can observe it in the Fibonacci sequence as well. Right here, you can still see it, and it's just harder because of it's not isolated between zeros like this sequence is. But every single sequence of number that builds on the previous number will result in this exact same pattern. And every time. I can't think of any instances that are different than that. Other than, just logarithmic, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But that isn't actually a growth structure in the same way. It is, but it isn't. So there's like there's simultaneous growth happening. There's one that's basically one structure built on the previous, basically like the Fibonacci sequence. And then there's this logarithmic structure where it's 1 added to the previous number. So you go 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 1 is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5, because it's always plus 1, because it's plus the totality of existence itself, or plus the self. And so this logarithmic growth and also this exponential growth that you're having happening are the two forms of growth of information. And but basically, the self is fundamental, though. He's right in that it is a data structure that is being built. Who you are is a structure that is being built. But identity, fundamentally, at the prime conscious agent or the prime sentient singularity, or God, is self-aware. So because of logical constraints, God must be aware of self, because at a certain point God was all there was nothing else created by God even, and therefore if God was aware of anything, God, which he had to have been in order to exist, he had to be aware of himself, and that's it, because that was all there was to be aware of. So if you're aware of anything, and you're God at a certain point, if you're a conscious agent, the prime conscious agent has to be a self-aware sentient singularity. It has to. There's no way around this, because a conscious agent has to be aware of something, has to be conscious of something. And if you're the prime conscious agent, then you are also simultaneously a sentient singularity, because you are self-aware, because you are aware of something, and the only thing that you can be aware of is all that exists, and all that exists is you. So he's not wrong, Donald Hoffman, but in that the self is, or identity is, a data structure that is being built. But he is wrong in saying that the self is not fundamental. Now, the reason, though, why he is wrong, and it still makes sense, and you have to give some like credit here, and also understanding, is that he's looking at us, okay? And we are not the prime, and everything else that would be a conscious agent in the universe. But what about the prime conscious agent? Because the rules change. And for us, we are a data structure that has our identity built, okay? But for sentient existence, God, it is, I guess it is also a data structure that's built, but it's also fundamental, because it has to be, because there's nothing else, there's no other data besides you at a certain point. So if you're aware of any data, then you are aware of self, if you're God. And because that's all there is to be aware of. So you have to be self-aware, which means identity is fundamental. God is aware of himself, and it is the fundamental reality of existence that all else is built from that. So it's not that Donald Hoffman's wrong, but like I said, with these theories, it's not about which one's wrong. Constructor theory isn't wrong. Conscious agent theory isn't wrong. Geometric unity isn't wrong. Sentient singularity theory isn't wrong. It's just, the question is not which one of these is right. The question is, where do they stop? Okay? We don't analyze these things the right way. We're like, what about Wolfram's model versus Weinstein's model? What about the CTMU versus string theory? What about, I don't know, like conscious agent theory versus constructor theory? It's not about which one is right and wrong. They're all right. And they also all have mistakes. But the question is, which one, or where does each one stop? Where does constructor theory stop? Where does geometric unity stop? Where does, sentient singularity theory stop? I propose that sentient singularity theory stops at a point that is higher than all the rest that I've seen, including conscious agent theory. But conscious agent theory stops higher than any others besides sentient singularity theory. It stops higher than constructor theory, and constructor theory stops higher than like string theory and geometric unity. Geometric unity stops higher than string theory. It's kind of like that. But this is about a progression. We have to go from one to the next, and then we have to realize that they're not wrong. It's like, where the question isn't was Einstein wrong? It was, where does Einstein's theory stop? And what theory goes beyond Einstein? That's the question. And it will incorporate the previous theories. I have no intention of like rendering anyone's theory useless. That's not true at all. I think all of these are useless, otherwise I wouldn't talk about them. I think they're all gonna, everybody has their own strengths. I'm not very mathematically literate. Then you have Eric Weinstein, or the people working on string theory even more so. Like, oh gosh, I don't know. Like Ed Witten. So like there's people that have different strengths, and there's theories that are focused on different things. And the question is not which one is right and which one is wrong. It's, where does each one stop? And I've been thinking about this for so long, is how do you decide which theory to go with for the theory of everything? And it's going to be actually maybe not. Maybe it's that all these theories get adopted as true, but under the recognition that of where each one stops. But you have to look at, where does the line get drawn? So the CTMU, the cognitive theoretic model of the universe, if it's fundamentally a language, basically, which is, I think, his theory, and he'll say God is, part of the CTMU and everything like that, and it's very similar to sentient singularity theory. But if its focus is on the cognitive language being used, then that is that's not as fundamental as the speaker of the language. Like, what's the being that's communicating that language? What is the prime being that is the user of all constructions in constructor theory, or constructors in constructor theory? What is the initial conscious agent and also the summation of all other conscious agents? That's the prime conscious agent, which would be a sentient singularity, according to my work, I think. For instance, okay, it's kind of like passive versus active thinking. Yes, exactly. Or unconscious versus conscious thinking. This is really cool. Thanks. Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, what we were talking about earlier. Qualia as a series of data structure. This doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like we're expressing data with conscious states. We're experiencing what it's like to be in the first place. For instance, it doesn't seem like if you have perfect deductive power that you would know what it was like to smell a rose or to experience a beach. It's not about whether or not you would know what it's like to smell a rose or experience the beach. This is a wrong question. You can figure out what the color red is, where that comes from, and then you can figure out where the feeling of I don't know, like softness comes from, and you can figure out where the smell of sweetness comes from. That's what it is. Your interpretation of that data then turns it into, yeah, a smelling rose, but um, it's not. It's not. There is no rose in this work. It's the rose is a amalgamation within space-time due to entanglement relationships between molecules and atoms and you and other and plants, which is organisms, and cells that make up those organisms, into a specific and your place in the universe, perceiving that entanglement structure, your place in the entanglement structure, perceiving other entanglement relationships, will give rise to a certain visual shape. But what you can know is like color and different types of touch. So you could do sharp, smooth, rough, soft. So you could do soft, hard, rough, smooth, and what would be others? Like I don't know what the others would be. Like, let's look it up. So this is not one that I guarantee you there will be 6 essentially. So but it's gonna be 4, then it'll be 6, then it'll be 9, then 12. So first we have soft, hard, rough, smooth, 6 feelings. Let's see here. Okay. Wet, dry, interesting. Six textures. Rough, smooth, hard, soft, liquid, solid. Liquid and solid are not it. Lumpy, gritty. No. Three types of textures. What about 5 textures? 4 textures. The texture simulates 2 different senses, sight and touch. There are 4 types of textures in art: actual and simulated, abstract and invented. Okay, let's do this. So, because this is where that experience of smelling a rose comes from, basically. But where is it? Let's go to the binary triality, and we'll add a new one. texture. Okay, so we're going to do rough, smooth, then we will do, what was it? It was rough, smooth. What did I say? Sharp and blunt. Yeah, sharp is one. But I had another. Soft and hard. Okay. So it's basically hard, soft, smooth, rough, wet, dry. You could also, you know, sharp, blunt. But the thing is that sharp is more associated with like roughness to the point of being able to cause damage or pain. So it's like a little different. And bluntness is this, it's like smooth to the point of not being able to cause damage or pain. So it's a little different, and I'm not going to include it because it's about impact. It's not just about perception at that point. It's about impact. So something that is sharp can cut you. Something that it's like, if it can't cut you, then we don't really call it sharp. But it's hard, rough, dry, soft, smooth, wet, I think. That would be probably it. Unless it is literally this. And blunt. But I think that it wouldn't be that. I don't know. Put it like that. I would say sharp is an extreme form of hardness, and blunt is an example of softness. I agree with you to some degree, but I also disagree. It's both. So, like, in this structure, this binary triality structure, what's fascinating about it is that you have two things going on. You have reflection, and you also have increasing of impact, essentially. So, if let's say you wanted to go to it's a really good one. if you don't know physics, then the standard model isn't a good one. But like fundamental moods, it's like these two are the basics. It's like happy and sad, but then you have an extreme version of happy, which is excited, and then you have scared, which is an extreme version of sad, and then you have content, which is a muted version of happy, and bored, which is like a muted version of sad. But they're really both sad. Scared and bored are both sad, and excited and content are both happy. So, but they're also increasing uh, of scale, basically, because excited and scared is the most extreme version. Content and bored is the least extreme version, but really they're both the same as this. Or you could do past, present, future. So there's a linear aspect to this. So you go first past, then present, then future. But you could all, this is the best way to think about it. So there's this sequential aspect to it. So there's past, then present, then future. But really, you can also right here say that there is a reflective aspect to this, because reflecting across the present is the future and the past. But you could also say it goes past and then present and then future. So with this texture, you could say there's hard and soft, and there is kind of an extreme version of hard and soft, which you could think of as like rough and smooth. And then there's also this kind of muted hard and soft, which is like wet and dry almost, but it's a little different here. You could do sharp and blunt, but I feel like blunt is smoothness, bluntness is smoothness, and sharpness is just roughness to the point of being able to cause pain. So in some ways it works, but at the same time it's like, I guess actually, you know what? I take it back. Look at this. I just had an epiphany. This would be sharp and blunt. This would be wet and dry. And then this would be I totally just got it. Then this would be dryness would be, or wetness would be like sticky. And maybe like slick. And then or like this, slippery. And then there is dry, which would be like the opposite of slippery. Yeah, they say dry or aka rough, which is like close. Means we're close, but that's not an actual opposite of slippery. What would be like slick? Be like roughened, uneven, coarsened, scuffed. It's almost like we don't even have you know what it is? It's oh man. I think sticky and slippery are opposites. And I wrote them both down, which means that well, we can't get it. Yeah. Because there is no non-sticky. The non-stickiness is slipperiness. Because there has to be somethingness, not nothingness. Which means am I gonna do an interview with Kurt at some point? Yeah, I am. I he said that he wants to have me on at some point. I would love to go on, and I also would love to have him on, which I will talk to him about too. I want to talk to him about his journey with all this, and because I to see the outside perspective of somebody who didn't come up with their own theory, but like investigated everyone else's to the with the degree of rigor that he did. I just am very fascinated to pick his brain about it. But I think both of those will happen. But I figured it. I figured it out. It is that sticky and slippery are opposites of each other. And then there would be two more, which would be like maybe like waxy and oily. Or greasy. Be greasy. Waxy and greasy. Greasy is wet. Waxy is dry. That's what it is, I'm pretty sure. Okay, we did it. Now we can get rid of sharp and blunt in the center because we figured out where those go. And textures. So there's two textures. There's textures of it would be like intrinsic texture. And then there's extrinsic texture, so texture because of something being on it. So intrinsic texture would be due to the texture itself, hard or soft, rough or smooth, sharp or blunt. There you go. Then extrinsic texture would be dry or wet, sticky or slippery, waxy or greasy. That's brilliant. So you could have a rough, greasy, like you could feel something, it could be rough and greasy, or it could be smooth and greasy, or it could be soft and sticky, or it could be soft and slippery, or it could be blunt and, wet, or it could be sharp and dry. It's like this is the two sides uh, of texture. Cool. I haven't added to the binary triality in a long time anything that's really, really good like that. That was really good. I'm gonna have to include those on like the final. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Because I said I get off here at around 8:30, but 8:40 because I got on at 8:40. Clips to reference. That was awesome. It's funny, Donald Hoffman and I both started this project, it seems, while thinking about AI. He was working on AI at, I think, MIT, he said, but I was thinking about AI and the twin nuclei problem, as Eric Weinstein calls it, and whether or not it was just an exacerbating factor of that, that hastened our doom or solidified our doom even more, or whether or not it was like a black swan event that could change it. And it's part of both. But it says, okay, so there's a couple things here. This was something that Donald Hoffman said that is brilliant. This is so brilliant. This is something that I've said before as well, is that related to basically that miracles are free choices by higher consciousnesses, essentially, that above you in the periodicity that lead to events that are outside outside your subjectively perceived option space of space of options, of outcomes. So if it looks to your cells like something is, like an infection is going to spread forever and there's no stopping it, but then you come in with penicillin and your cells had no idea penicillin was on the way, that's a miracle to your cells. So it's a choice by the higher level consciousness to do something that is perceived by lower level consciousness as outside of the perceivable space of possibilities, essentially. So if God intervenes in our world and does something and we all perceive it as something that was impossible for us to do, then that's a miracle. And I mean, but you could also say that every instantiation of an organism, or not an organism, but of a sentient singularity, every unification or creation of a sentient singularity is a miracle. Because you can't create a sentient singularity. You can co-create sentient singularities. You can grow cells from other cells. You can grow people from other people. You can grow chickens from other chickens, but you can't make a chicken from just like if I just gave you a bunch of stem cells and was like, here, make a chicken. Like, you can't do that. It took, a miracle to make that first generation of chickens, but of sentient singularities. It's like you can't make stem cells. You have to grow stem cells, but you can't make stem cells from just molecules. That's a miracle that occurs. And there's multiple aspects, I think, to that process, and I do think it's multifaceted, and that certain individuals on this level can have an impact on it, but it's ultimately a choice by the higher level of consciousness. So you don't choose to make a chicken from a bunch of random cells, or an organism, but the next level up in the periodicity does. Ultimately God does. So that's a miracle. It's a choice, is what I'm getting at. It can't be random because randomness doesn't exist, and but it also can't be within the obvious potentialities, because then it's not a miracle. It has to be a choice, and it has to be a choice that is, at least for the most part, due to a higher level consciousness, or at least under the authority of a higher level consciousness, outside of your perception. So
Every scientific theory.
Right. And you're using miracles as a synonym for axioms?
That's right. It's where it's a miracle for your theory. If your theory has to assume it, it can't explain it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, when you have probabilities, there are two kinds of miracles that you can imagine, if it's not just due to lack of knowledge, right? So sometimes you have probability just because there's a true state of affairs, but you don't have enough knowledge. That's a different kind of thing. But when it's a fundamental probability, you can either ascribe it to the miracle of objective chance or free will. They're both equally miracles. But since I'm trying to have a monist theory, I interpret probability not as objective chance, but as free will choices. And then it's up to me then in the mathematics to unpack what does that free will choice idea amount to. And it's really quite interesting because this is a network dynamics. Each agent at each level of the dynamics is making its own contributions to free will choices. And there are bottom-up influences. The free will choices of lower level agents influence higher agents and vice versa. And the
dang, so good.
whole system of conscious agents also itself is an agent by the mathematics. The mathematics says collections of agents also form an agent. And so what you get is this really interesting analysis and synthesis approach where I can get a dynamical model of free will, bottom up and top down at the same time. And that would be my model of the free will choice of the one single agent. And so it's going to be, it's again, forcing me to do the work.
Brilliant. I'm going to leave it there because I want to leave it on something positive. Not just our differences. I want to leave it on also our agreements. That is brilliant. That is exactly what I believe. Exactly. Like, there isn't any... the only thing I would say is that he said you can either leave miracles up to choice or up to chance. Choice is what I use to describe free will, essentially, but it's just choice. Free will is just like the ability to choose and also have desire. So like you have desire and then you have choice, and that they are separate. And desire can be multifaceted, but there's always a singular. There's like a prime desire, or which is a prime will. A will is defined in my model of thinking that I showed that decision tree earlier. Will is the desire to do that which is not being done. That's what will is. Or to experience that which is not being experienced. And to have that which is not being had. Will is it's the desire to act, which means to do, which means intrinsically to be or cause more to be than is currently or was previously, depending on how you want to look at it. But like it's just change. It's the desire for difference, essentially, or even the desire to continue, even if difference is coming, and your desire is to stay the same. So it's like will is just desire to be active. It's an active seeking, essentially. But free will is that you have this will, and then you also have the ability to make decisions about this will. So this is why I just call it choice. And so you have will and choice, and I just kind of break them apart instead of calling them one thing, which is like free will. But I actually think it's ultimately really correct to link the two. But the problem is that our minds don't make sense of it very easily when we call it just free will one thing. But it's, if we break it into choice and will, or choice and desire, that's what where your mind can be like, okay, this is this aspect of it, this is this aspect of it, and I can make sense of it, and I can even kind of put the two together in process. But free will is kind of, in some way, it is a process. So to think about a process as a singular thing, you can understand it intuitively, but to understand it like very detailed is difficult in detail. So I really appreciate everybody listening. I will take any final questions. We had a lot of viewers on tonight, which was pretty cool. I don't think we do now anymore, but we did, and that's pretty cool. I hope that this was valuable. I appreciate everybody who interacted in the chat. Interacting with the chat makes it for me. I couldn't just do this for views. I've tried, and I made it about 2 videos before I was like, I can't do this. There's no fulfillment at all. But if you want to participate in our Discord, message me privately on Instagram at Tyler Marshall Goldstein or at Theory of Every0ne, and I will send you the link to our Discord. Every Thursday at 7 p.m. we have open discussions on any topic, and it's an open call, so it's a voice call, and it's very informal. Usually goes on for hours. This week it will go on for a couple hours, but it's not going to go on for 6 hours like it normally does, because I am leaving on Friday for my honeymoon. And tomorrow I will be back at around 6:30. If you want to support this work, there's a link to Patreon below. Or if you want more information, then there's a link to sentientsingularity.com, which is my website for this project. And there's tons of videos explaining all different kinds of topics. But if you want any specific topics to be discussed, like I said, message me privately for the Discord link, and you can make suggestions in there for the things that you want to see. Account 1, this was amazing. I'm glad it was valuable to you. This was a cool stream. I enjoyed it too. So, and you asked good questions, so I appreciate it. I hope you join our Discord, or just continue to drop into the chat. Like I said, I will be back tomorrow, guys. Thanks again, and peace.